And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Friday, August 9th, 2024. And we start out with the sea ice and looking to the far north along the Beaufort Sea coastline in the Arctic regions. We continue to have rather rapid melt-off of remaining ice there along areas of the Beaufort Sea with plenty of open water coming down along the northwest coast, the Chukchi Sea coastline to the Bering Strait. Though on the other side there, the Russian side, we do have some coastal ice still in place there, but otherwise we will continue to see the ice gradually melt off across this region here as we head through the late summer period. Getting pretty close to early fall. We're starting to see some hints of weather systems that kind of have that early fall look and feel to them. We're going to have an area of low pressure tracking just north of the Aleutians tonight into early Saturday morning. This low is going to take a track right to about Kuskokwim Bay. It does have some strong winds around it, gale force winds with some storm force gusts as it works its way into Bristol Bay and along portions of the Alaska Peninsula. In addition, there will be periods of moderate to locally heavy rain associated with this low and frontal system as it works its way across the Alaska Peninsula Saturday, up into the western Gulf and areas of the southwest interior and along and south of the Alaska Range. In fact, higher elevations of the Alaska Range will be getting snowfall. But by the time we get into Sunday, that front will continue eastward through the central Gulf and it'll start to spread some showers or areas of rain even up into the northern Panhandle. And areas of rain will begin to at least let up a bit from Cook Inlet, western Kenai Peninsula, off to the southwest. There's another system dropping in from eastern Russia that will bring in a little cooler air, some additional showers or mixed showers here in the Chukchi Sea. So looking at the marine forecast on Saturday for the southeast Panhandle, look for northwest winds to 35 knots there in Lynn Canal with waves as high as 4 feet. Variable winds around 10 knots, 2-foot waves vicinity of Stevens Passage. Northwest winds 10 knots or 15 knots with waves of 5 to 6 feet. Dixon Entrance. For the outer coast, west to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Swells 8 to 10 feet south of Gustavus off of Sitka and Craig. Westerly winds around 5 knots, Yakutat Bay toward Cape Suckling. By Sunday, for the inner channels, we're going to have that front approaching from the central Gulf. So we expect south winds to 15 knots, 2-foot waves within Lynn Canal. Stevens Passage, southeast winds to 15 knots, 2-foot waves, and then northwest winds 15 knots and waves 3 feet here within Dixon Entrance. For the outer coast, look for west, then southerly winds 20 to 25 knots from Craig off to Sitka, swells 5 to 7 feet, but then southeast to east gales 35 to 45 knots as you get outside of Yakutat Bay to Cape Suckling with swells in that area 7 to 9 feet. And then for Saturday, strongest winds will be there at the entrance of Cook Inlet, 40-knot southeasterly gales with swells up to 12 feet. Lower Cook Inlet as we go up there off of, Anchor Point, southeast winds to 30 knots, 8-foot waves, south winds to 20 knots, Upper Cook Inlet, and south winds to 20 knots within Prince William Sound with 3-foot waves. For Sunday, with that frontal system and secondary little low that will be situated here, we find southeast winds to 30 knots within Prince William Sound in that wider expanse with swells of 6-7 feet. Outside of Hitchinbrook Entrance, look for 30 to 40 knot south to southwest winds and swells of 9 to 10 feet, 25 knot westerly winds off the Kenai Peninsula, 15-foot swells, and then 40 knot westerly gales, lower Cook Inlet to just northeast of Kodiak Island with swells of 10 to 12 feet. Across the Alaska Peninsula and up into Kodiak Island Saturday, winds will be south-southeast 30 to 35 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, but elsewhere 30 to 40 knot southerly winds down the length of the Alaska Peninsula with gust to storm force 50-55 knots there north of Cold Bay on the Bering side, and we're looking at swells 10 to 13 feet on the North Pacific side of the peninsula and 6 to 8 feet on the Bering side. Those winds will come down on Sunday, though still westerly, 30 knots there, Shelikof Strait, east side of Kodiak Island into Bristol Bay, east of Chicknick, swells 8 to 10 feet, and then falling off to southwest to west, 20 to 25 knots as we trail out here the Alaska Peninsula, swells 5 feet or so on the North Pacific side, 7 to 8 feet on the Bering side. Winds will be westerly gales to 35 knots, vicinity of Unalaska Dutch Harbor, becoming westerly near Nikolsky, 30 knots, and then northwest winds fall back off 25 and 20 knots west of Adak, and then turn more northerly Kiska to Shemya. And then winds come down considerably Sunday. We are looking at generally, once we get past the eastern Aleutians, west winds of 20 knots, fairly variable winds, 10 knots on the Bering side of the Aleutian chain, and then kind of an east-southeast mix of 15-knot winds on the south side, on the North Pacific side. And for Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay on Saturday, look for southeasterly 30-knot winds, swells 7 to 8 feet. On the backside of low circulation, we have north winds 25 knots, St. Matthew, northwest winds 30 knots with swells to 9 feet. Pribilov Islands, and offshore easterly flow to 20 knots, lower portions of the Yukon Delta with southeast winds to 15 knots within Norton Sound. And then on Sunday, across the region, winds become westerly. So we're looking at westerly winds of 25 to 30 knots from Hooper Bay down to St. Matthew, St. Paul, into Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. Swells generally 6-7 feet, though could be as high as 9 feet out there towards St. Matthew. And then as we get into the area around the Yukon Delta, Imanak, on up into Norton Sound, westerly winds to 20 knots with swells of 4 feet. Areas along this western Seward Peninsula for east winds to 15 knots, northeast winds on the north side of St. Lawrence Island, swells 3 feet. Through the lower Chukchi Sea, 10 to 20 knot southeast to south winds with swells of 2 to 4 feet. And as we round up along the Arctic coast, winds become more easterly, east-northeasterly around 10 knots with waves of 2 feet. And for Sunday, winds continue 10 to 15 knots along the Arctic coast, especially Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik with 3-foot waves. And as we drop down through the lower Chukchi Sea, look for southerly winds of 10 to 15 knots, waves generally around 3 feet. And then south of the Bering Strait, winds could be as high as 20 knots from the south with 3 to 4 foot waves on the north side of St. Lawrence.